Story 1, school desk. In South Korea, parents put a lot of pressure on their children to study hard and do well at school. There was one Korean girl whose parents were especially tough on her. They forced her to study 7 days a week, and she was seldom allowed to go out and have fun with her friends. They even bought her an old school desk so she could study better at home. After a few days, the girl started to have problems. It was not that the subjects she was studying were difficult. Instead, it was the fact that her back would start to hurt whenever she was sitting in her desk for more than a few minutes. The pain became worse and worse, and she couldn't study properly. Her grades began to slip, and her parents began to worry. Her mother took her to numerous doctors, but none of them could find anything wrong with her back. They said that it must be due to stress. The strange thing was that the girl could study without any problems when she was in school, but as soon as she came home and sat down at her desk, she began feeling intense pain in her back. As the girl's grades slipped lower and lower, her mother became desperate to solve the problem. She even started to consult psychics and fortune tellers in the hopes that they could find a cure for what was ailing her daughter. Unfortunately, none of them could help. However, one day, the mother was talking to one of her friends. The woman suggested that it could be something to do with the girl's posture. She told the mother to take a photograph of her daughter sitting at the desk. The mother went home that night and took her camera out of the cupboard. The girl sat down at the school desk, and the mother snapped a picture. When she looked at the photograph, she was horrified. Her daughter was sitting at the school desk, but above her was another girl hanging by the neck from a noose. The ghostly girl was desperately trying to put her feet on the daughter's shoulders. The next morning, the mother went to the school where she had bought the desk and interrogated the school principal. It turned out that the mysterious girl in the picture was an ex-pupil of the school. She was the girl who had previously sat at that desk. She hadn't been able to handle the pressure of school, and she had hung herself in the classroom a few years before. Story 2, Robert the Doll. Robert the Doll is a true ghost story about a haunted doll in a museum in Key West, Florida. The doll is real, and some say it is the subject of an evil curse. Many people claim they have seen it blinking and moving. Take a look at Robert the Haunted Doll. He sits under lock and key in a glass case located in the basement of a museum in Key West, Florida. At first glance, Robert may seem like a harmless children's doll, but looks can be deceiving because Robert is the most haunted doll in the world. In 1897, a family named Otto lived in a nearby house in Key West. They owned a plantation and had a lot of servants working for them who they treated very badly. One servant girl gave their son Gene a present of a doll. What the Ottos didn't realize was that this servant girl knew voodoo and black magic. Gene's full name was Robert Eugene Otto. His parents had always called him Gene, so he decided to give the doll his real name, Robert. Many strange things began to occur in the Otto household. Neighbors claimed to see Robert moving about from window to window when the family were out. Gene began to blame Robert for mishaps that would occur. The Ottos claimed to hear the doll giggle and swore they caught glimpses of the doll running about the house. Gene began to have nightmares and scream out in the night. When his parents would enter a room, they would find furniture overturned, their child in a fright, and Robert at the foot of the bed with his glaring gaze. Robert did it. Gene would cry. The doll was eventually put up into the attic, where he resided for many years. But Robert had other plans. Visitors that entered the house could hear something walking back and forth in the attic, and strange giggling sounds. Guests no longer wanted to visit the Otto home. Gene Otto died in 1972, and the house was sold to a new family. The story of Robert the Doll had died down, but Robert waited patiently up in the attic to be discovered once again. The 10-year-old daughter of the new owners was quick to find Robert in the attic. It was not long before Robert unleashed his displeasure on the child. The little girl claimed that the doll tortured her and made her life a hell. Even after more than 30 years later, she steadfastly claims that the doll was alive and wanted to kill her. Robert, still dressed in his white sailor suit and clutching his stuffed lion, lives quite comfortably, though well guarded, at the Key West Martello Museum. Employees at the museum say that Robert is still up to his old tricks today. Story 3, Headhunter. In the early 1800s, there was a man named Bill Quick who made his living hunting and trapping. He lived with his father in an old cabin on the Scioto River near Kenton, Ohio. At the time, there was a violent war being fought between the whites and the American Indians. One day, Bill went out hunting. When he returned in the evening, he was horrified to find that the cabin had been attacked by Indians. They had ransacked the place and robbed everything of value. His father was lying dead on the floor in a pool of blood. Bill flew into a rage, and there and then, he swore that he would get revenge for his father's murder. From that moment on, he launched a one-man war against the Indians. He stalked the woods and rivers, searching for Indians and killing any he came across. Bill didn't care if they were guilty or innocent. He killed indiscriminately. He would hide in the trees, watching the Indians, and when they least suspected it, he would throw his knife and stab them in the heart. He would chase them on horseback and shoot them down where they stood. He would wait until they went asleep, and then he would bash their skulls in with an axe. He showed no mercy. After he killed the Indians, he chopped off their heads and took them home with him. In his cabin, Bill put up shelves on the wall to display the severed heads of his victims. As the years passed by, he amassed a collection of 99 grotesque severed heads, and he displayed them all proudly, like trophies on his wall. One more head, he told himself. Just one more head, and then my revenge will be complete. However, the Indians were aware that a crazy white man was after them. They stayed on their guard at all times, and eventually most of them left the area. Bill never managed to get his 100th head. He was struck down by a fatal illness. As he lay on his deathbed, he called his son, Tom, to his side. Pointing to the rows of severed heads on the wall, he said, "It's up to you now, Tom. You must complete my mission. You must get me that 100th head. If you don't, I'll come back to haunt you." Tom promised his father that he would do his best, and shortly afterwards, Bill quick died. Tom tried to make good on his gruesome vow, but he wasn't much of a hunter. In fact, he didn't like violence at all, and he couldn't even shoot straight. Anyway, by that time, all the Indians had left the region. Night after night, Tom stared at the severed heads on the wall. He kept putting off the unpleasant duty of filling the final space on the shelf. He felt very guilty about failing to keep the promise he made to his father. One night, when Tom returned home, he noticed something very strange. The severed heads on the wall started moving. Their eyes were open, and they suddenly began to gibber and shriek and clack their teeth together. Tom was scared out of his wits and fled from the cabin. Tom babbled out his story to anyone in town who would listen, but nobody believed him. They all thought he was losing his mind. As his mind became more unstable, he grew more and more determined to carry out his promise to his father. When he heard that a band of Indians had been seen in the neighborhood, Tom took up his rifle and set out on his horrible mission. Shortly afterwards, a neighbor heard a single shot, and it came from the direction of Tom Quick's cabin. Hurrying to see what had happened, the man found the cabin silent and the door closed. He knocked on the door and called out, but there was no answer, so he went inside to take a look around. He stared in horror at all the severed heads that lined the wall. On the top shelf sat the 100th head. Its mouth was open in a terrible grimace, and it leered down at him. There was a bullet hole right through its forehead.